Welcome in another edition of Soccer Down here. It's an evening edition, it's a holiday edition, and it's a special guest edition as Jessica Charman rejoins the show. What's up, Jess?
What's up? It has been a while. Feels a little bit weird seeing the two of you, your faces as well. I was a little overwhelmed. Jason's grown a beard in quarantine.
There's nothing else to do, so I was kind of like, let's see what happens if I let a beard grow out, and, it's okay. I'm waiting to see what other colors come into it, because it's like, I've always had like a red highlight to my hair. That's always been there, and then gray started taking that over, but that's a whole nother story. But in my beard, there's always more red that came out than on the top of my head. But now the gray is coming out in the middle, so it's just a patchwork quilt of a beard. So I'll go with it.
Probably fashion. I think that's fashionable these days, the sort of dip dye look.
That's a good answer. I like it. I'll take that. I will roll with that. But we'll see what happens with it. I don't know if it's going to stay or not once we get back to normal activities. And, there's some chances, according to what people are saying, there could be Major League Soccer in July. I don't know what a timeline looks like for USL Championship. And a lot of the big talk today was NWSL. And they could be the first American team sport that's playing games by the end of June. It's been kind of a weird day in the soccer world.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw with the NWSL, this could be a really good thing for women's soccer in the US. We saw what a huge impact it had on Bundesliga when it came back. It was the first soccer back. So a lot of people that maybe wouldn't have usually watched Bundesliga were suddenly paying attention. Now, if that happens with the NWSL and it has that wave of interest, along with what happened with the Women's World Cup, this could almost be a blessing in disguise for the league if it gets that focus from the neutral fan. However, on the flip side, you've got to think, do you want the world's eye if it's not going to be done correctly? If you rush, if the players aren't conditioned correctly, if the standard isn't going to be what you're expecting, if some of the best players in the US are opting not to play, is that the right time to have the world's eye on it? So you've got sort of the devil's advocate and the positivity of bringing back NWSL.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about some of the best players not playing. Caitlin Murray had a great piece over at Yahoo Sports today, and this is an important element of it. And it's not trying to throw shade. It's just an important element for U.S. women's national team players. They're making $100,000 from their national team salary, regardless of if the national team plays a game or not. Also, they're getting $72,500 for being in NWSL, regardless if the league plays or not. So they don't have to play. They're not worried about that as much. Now, the NWSL contracts don't have a specific force majeure clause that we're all learning about, where they can say, we're not going to pay you. We're basically going to break your contract because of this pandemic. And there hasn't been any cut in pay yet. They haven't halted any payments, and they haven't said they will. But that has to be in the back of your mind if you're an NWSL player, because there's no guarantee that they play a whole season. I know they want to play more than this, but, look, the Women's Super League canceled the rest of their season. Other women's leagues are canceling the seasons. The financial side of it doesn't really match up very well.
No, not at all. And I think what you have to consider is, if you do have the guaranteed money, are you wondering about the health consequences? Are you thinking about the fact you're going to have to play on turf potentially if the tournament's in Utah, which is what I read? It will be a lot of games on turf, and we've seen the issues that women's soccer has stated about the inequality of playing on turf. So they have reasons to maybe not play if that clause, if they're able to still get paid. Why would they play if there's a risk to their health, or they're not going to be able to play the best standard of soccer, or if it's a tournament and that's not what they're interested in?
It's tough. John, have you dug into this much today with the Caitlin Murray piece and also the Meg Linehan and Pablo Maurer piece over at The Athletic?
Read the Linehan-Maurer piece, and I'm learning about the Yahoo piece as a bit of our pre-flight. And the one element in the Murray piece that also stuck out to me was that there was a hope that some of the players, and correct me if I misinterpreted this, but the hope or interest that some of the national team players would hope that U.S. Soccer would step in and tell the league that the national team players should not participate as a part of this whole dynamic that could be in play as to whether or not you would have all of your women's national team players, some or none.
Yeah, Murray said that one of her sources is telling Yahoo Sports that they hope U.S. Soccer would refuse to give its blessing to the tournament as a whole. That would, allow the women's national team players to not look like the bad guys in the scenario, and then the tournament doesn't get the blessing. The other element of this, and look, we've talked a lot about the financials. We've talked a whole lot about the financial implications of COVID-19 on the soccer world, and I think in the women's game, it's even more potentially severe because the TV money isn't there to make up for the lack of gate revenue. And that was ultimately the decision the Women's Super League made. They would have had to pay anywhere between $140,000 and £200,000 to finish the season for the testing, just the testing to get it done. Without gate money, that's not a smart option. It's not realistic. The NWSL is pretty much the same. We talked about it last week, John, with FC Cincinnati saying 90% of their revenue is gate revenue. It's probably even higher for most NWSL teams, if not all. Can you afford to do this? And in the Linehan-Maurer piece, and something I wanted to ask you about, one of the things that the league is telling the players is this is going to create commercial opportunities, potential sponsors, and they call it, quote, vital to the very sustainability of our league.
Yeah. And as I was trying to process all of the information involving possible TV contracts and everything, it's easy to sit here and say that if women's national team players are not involved in this tournament, that CBS Sports and whichever property would be attached would not be all that enthused with having this product as a part of their dossier, and you don't have the marquee players coming at you. It's like you sit there on the marquee of the movie theater and you just put that you're showing Back to the Future when you're really showing Back to the Future 3. Or you've got Rocky on the marquee and you're showing Rocky 5. It's one of those elements here that I think that if you're CBS, I think that you're in a bit of a wait-and-see mode, but I could understand a lack of enthusiasm. But at the same time, though, I think that there have to be something along the lines of understanding the situation that you're in and being of value to a league and to the women's soccer fan in general, that if you show your support, if CBS shows their support for the league in whatever form it's in, then women's soccer fans and soccer fans will understand what CBS did in sticking with the property and broadcasting it, even though it may not be on all CBS platforms. You may not get the marquee games that you would have thought of on CBS in the afternoons and things like that. But I think that there is some value for CBS to stick with this, because I think that you can have opportunities that could be created out of this season, as Jess was talking about just a little bit ago.
It's like good karma. If they stick with the women's game, there's been so many times that the women's game's been let down that you almost need someone big to get behind and back it. However, they're going to always think about money, and we know that. And is there the monetary value when you don't have those big name stars? When you think about which players they would put on the commercials for these games, the teasers, if half of them aren't going to be present, do you have that same marketing value? Do you have that same audience? Is the neutral that maybe is interested in the U.S. women's national team, but doesn't really yet care, per se, about the domestic leagues? Do they watch the game if they don't have that interest? Unfortunately, I would say probably not. And that's basing it from the Super League in England as well. A lot of men or just neutral fans that had no interest in the women's game before began to watch these Super League games before the Women's World Cup to start to learn players, or because they had an interest. But now, if you don't have those players playing, do you have such an interest? Maybe not, because you're not so invested in it. The neutralness dies down. I would say that the Bundesliga figures. I bet you on opening weekend, there's probably double the amount of people that watch this weekend. It drops off gradually as you don't have that personal investment in watching it, and the novelty wears off, per se.
You got to hook people. You've got to hook people straight away, and it's going to be harder for the NWSL to hook people without a Megan Rapinoe, without a Tobin Heath, without national team players that are known quantities. I think what this would do is CBS has a contract. They'd probably have to show a certain amount of games. They can probably show them on CBS Sports Network, which doesn't have a ton of coverage. They'd throw them on the CBS All Access app, which I think is where all the games are going to go. But the difference is if you have a final, for example, in this tournament of, I don't know, Reign against Portland, or you get North Carolina against Portland or Reign, and you get national team stars like a Crystal Dunn, like a Megan Rapinoe, like a Tobin Heath, that might get moved over to big CBS. You might throw that into CBS because right now the main thing that's moving the needle for TV is live sports. That's it, because you're running out of other stuff to show. This was a big thing that I've been looking at over the last couple of weeks. Right now, for a TV network, this is where you're filming pilots. This is where you're starting to film TV series for the fall. None of that's happening. Sports is going to be what can drive TV along with other live events in the fall as people figure it out. That's why TV wants sports back so bad. That's why the NWSL wants to get back right now, because they have the opportunity to be first. But like you said, Jess, if they don't have those stars, is it worth it to come back?
And the women's game already has such a stigma attached to it about potentially being the lesser game, about being slower, about being not as good of a standard. Now, that's no disrespect. All the players that play are of a high quality, but if you're missing those stars, and if these players haven't had long enough to train, haven't had long enough to condition, we've seen it again, I keep mentioning, but the Bundesliga, was it at the same level as it was before the end? No. Can you tell players aren't as conditioned? Yes. Can you tell they're not as sharp? Now, put that into the NWSL, where there is already people coming in with preconceptions about the speed of the game, about the style of the game, about, the women's goalkeeper is going to make a mistake because it's women's football. You're probably going to see more of those moments where people end up saying, I told you so. I told you the women's game wasn't up to it. Now, do you want to jeopardize what we've seen with a lot of progress in the game by putting out potentially a subpar product than what it can be?
But then the flip side is where you have to start to figure out the reality here, because if the NWSL doesn't play games this year, they might actually save more money, because it's going to cost them more to play these games than it is to not play games. But then you're going to start to have the questions about salaries and about contracts. And the league, look, nobody's making money outside of maybe Portland. Then you start to get into pay cuts, which you haven't had yet, or getting out of contracts, and the potential, as is talked about in the Linehan and Maurer article, that this could increase the risk of teams not surviving for next year.
Yeah, administration is calling. We've seen it across in Europe, in England, with the lower league teams who are terrified of going into administration. And before I arrived here in the US, I know that the Women's League hasn't exactly had the best history of sustaining itself. And just a few months ago, Jason, we were talking about how this is the most successful women's league possible. There's the opportunity for growth. I think we needed to knock on some wood during that conversation because things have changed. And so you're right. When you look at the future of this league, it may be important to take that money hit. It's going to cost money for the testing. It's going to cost money for the medical professionals, all the different protocol you have to follow. But maybe you have to take that hit for the long-term sustainability, because the U.S. doesn't have the best history of sustaining the women's game.
I mean, John, I look at it like if the NWSL comes back, really outside of the Women's League in Germany, That's the only other one that I think is talking about coming back. You could really be a trendsetter if you do that, and that becomes your pitch is, yes, we invested this money because we thought it was important to come back. The NWSL could be the only ones.
Mm-hmm.
I'm viewing this as just as much of an opportunity for the NWSL as anyone else, because I think that if you're, and I mean, you could generic this out to any business. Any business is going to view what we're going through right now as an opportunity. We've seen, and we've talked about it, the three of us have mentioned who has come out the other side of this shining so far. And I think that you could mention the same when it comes to sports, when it comes to leagues, when it comes to franchises, and possibly staking your claim into any of these opportunities. I'm fairly certain that if you were a businessman who sees an opportunity in something, that you could jump on the NWSL knowing what you've seen from the NWSL if the Utah plane comes together. Hey, they're sticking it out. They're showing that they're in this for the long haul. I think that my market, whatever my market is, could benefit from having the NWSL and this kind of stick-to-itiveness, this kind of benefit, this kind of soccer, not just women's soccer, but soccer in general, with the growth curve that's here. I think it could be just as much of an opportunity to hop into something, if you want to call it ground floor or early in the game. I think that you really could do something if you had an interest in the NWSL from this moment forward.
It's a huge opportunity to jump in because I think you'd be coming in as a potential savior in some ways, coming on the other side of this. Yeah, and look, that's attractive to some people who are going to be able to weather this whole pandemic and the hit it's going to take on people and businesses and teams. I mean, I'll be really curious with all of the recent investment in Europe from big clubs in the women's game. Is that going to continue? Because all of those big clubs, Barcelona, for example, Barcelona's in a world of hurt on the men's side right now, which is going to affect the bottom line across the board. Are they going to be able to spend the same money they have on the women's side? They're going to have to cut somewhere.
Exactly. Unfortunately, it's often the first to go as well. When you compare it, do you stop investing in your academy or do you stop investing in the women's game? Well, oftentimes it is the women's game because the academy is what's producing your product for the men's game, which is driving the money. So unfortunately, a lot of the time when you see those cuts, it does first go to investing in the female team because it's not always seen as a necessity.
Yeah, I think it's something that FIFA and FIFPro have both been forward thinking about and trying to make it clear that this investment needs to continue. If FIFA's going to put money from their reserves towards an element of the game that's going to need that support, I think it's the women's game because the financials aren't there to back it up quite yet. I think we were right in what we were saying earlier this year. You know, like things were really starting to turn that corner. This happened at the worst possible time for the women's game. I mean, the absolute worst. You had an Olympics coming up this year. That would have followed up on a huge World Cup. You had professional leagues growing. And this is a huge setback, and it's going to be difficult to overcome.
Oh, I'm right there with you. But then let me ask you this. With the ownership that OL Group has, Olympic Lyonnais, and now that they're tied to Reign FC, I think that this might be one of those test cases to sit there and look at. They invested, what was it, $3.5 million for the purchase in Reign.
Yeah.
So for me, because of the European theater, I'm going to be keeping an eye on Reign just because of this new interaction and how it might be as a part of the league, not just this year. Because this year I'm kind of putting to the side, but I'm thinking this year and in subsequent years just to see what the financial hit is for the parent club of OL Group and how it affects other things as we're talking about here just recently.
Well, I don't know if you saw it today. France continues to get crazy with all of this and all of the behind-the-scenes wrangling. So you had a couple things came out in France today, and Lyon's part of one of them. Senators have actually brought forward an amendment in the government to allow the French league to complete the season as long as it's safe to do so. You know, they declared that it was over. They also, and I didn't know the full pro-rel situation in Ligue 1. Originally, the bottom two would go down, and then team number 18 would have to play in a playoff against the winner of the second division playoff system.
Like Germany.
Yeah. Well, they scrapped that. So what they did is they said just 2 up, just 2 down, that's it. So the teams that had the opportunity to be in the playoff in the second division, they went to the French National Olympic and Sports Committee and complained. Now, they rejected it, so that's thrown out. You still have the teams that are getting relegated that are contesting it, and that hasn't been decided yet. But Lyon released an open letter on their website calling for the league to resume. So
they're not very happy about it.
No, because they're missing out on European football right now.
Choice words. I think the president had some choice words about the French league's decision from what I read. But
there's been rumors that the league made the decision they did and structured it the way they did to keep Lyon out of Europe. It was all payback because they don't like the president.
Some hatred and some going on behind there.
It's a mess.
But you've got to think about how much money and how much all sorts of things depend on promotion and relegation. Mm-hmm. It's money, it's players staying with you, it's fan bases. There's so much that depends on, even in England, in the Premier League, every single place that you finish in is worth like £1 million in revenue or something like that. It's insane how much money every spot is worth. So when you make these changes, they have long-term financial and just success consequences, and I think that's what's forgotten sometimes. I get that something has to be done, but when people are whining about Watford and when they're whining about the teams that are saying, oh, it's not fair, why can't we play home games, you have to understand how much depends on these different circumstances and what it could mean to a club that gets relegated, what it could mean to a club that finishes 3 spots lower because their points per game average is different, or because they had 6 home games left and then they had to play on neutral grounds. These little things aren't little things in the grand scheme of things for football teams.
No, they're not. I think we're getting to a point, and England is going to be the next battleground on all of this across all the different leagues. There's only so much you can do at this point because you are running out of time. You know, you've got TV contracts that you've got to try to fulfill, because if you don't, you're going to have to give back money that you might not be able to afford to give back in some cases. So you've got to try to find the best way forward out of it. And what's frustrating me is some of the arguing is don't like that, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that.
But there's no solution.
Yes. What do you do? What do you do?
Come up with what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, because everybody's having to figure it out. I've said from day one that with this scenario, with this situation, you should not relegate teams this year. And if that means you have a bigger league next year because you're promoting teams, okay, you figure it out for a year and then you fix it. But you shouldn't relegate anybody because that can do catastrophic damage to a club right now.
Exactly, particularly with all the financial hits that they're already taking, with the ticket sales, with probably a lot of teams, they're going to have free season tickets. You know what I mean? They might not be refunding the season ticket holders, but they're probably giving them a credit, like was said with Atlanta United, I believe. So you're not going to get this same level of revenue. So the financial hit is long term, even if you don't get relegated. You're going to be having to rebuild financially. Yeah. So you can't afford to relegate these teams. And potentially, I don't know, maybe in like the English League where you have 2 automatic promotions and you have 1 from the playoffs. Well, if you scrap the playoffs, that's 1 team less that gets promoted. So you're only gaining 2 teams to the Premier League. You're only gaining 2 to League One, and I think after that it goes up to 3 teams get promoted automatically in League Two. But it's not that big of a deal, and you know what? People are going to want more football games anyway when it comes around to it. When it's back and people are allowed to play, they're not going to complain about having an extra 2 or 3 games in the season.
Yeah, where it gets hard is what we're seeing at the bottom of the pyramid, where you've got League Two, for example, who is not finishing their season, but they're going to have a playoff to see who goes up. That's still going to cost those teams. I think one club estimated it at £200,000 just to come back for a playoff to maybe go up.
well, right? Because you have to have everyone tested before training.
Testing, all the protocol. You'd have to bring your players and your staff off of the furlough system.
God, you better hope you win that game then, right?
There's you say these games are expensive before? Oh, man, if you do all that and then don't go up,
and
you might be done.
And you lose on a penalty shootout. Imagine being that player that misses
you lose on a bad call. You lose on a bad penalty.
Yeah, you just back pass it to the goalie.
Lose their minds. John, did you see Stevenage? Phil Wallace came out and had some things to say.
I saw that Barnsley had some things to say. I know that Stevenage has naturally been pretty angry. Tell me about Stevenage.
Yeah, let's start from the bottom. You tell me about Barnsley in a minute. Stevenage, League Two, they have blasted the EFL board recommendation. They say there is absolutely no integrity in allowing teams to play to win promotion, but not allowing teams in the same league to play to avoid relegation. They would get relegated right now. They would be going down to the National League. The clubs in League Two voted to end the campaign, but they voted not to have relegation. That's been worded a little differently in some other articles we've read. Stevenage's chairman, Phil Wallace, is saying that the vote was to end the season, but to have no relegation. The EFL has said you have to have relegation. It's part of the integrity of the pyramid and whatever other nonsense they're using to justify it. So they're going to have a board meeting on Wednesday. Wallace is fired up going into this thing. He said there's absolutely no integrity whatsoever in using a mathematical formula to expel a club from the EFL. He said
I love that word.
Yeah, expel is the way to put it. He said since the National League season wasn't completed in the way it was intended, one option is to leave League Two as it is with no relegation and promote one club from the National League this season instead of two. Now, people might have a problem with that. Actually, you'd have to do two because Bury's gone. So you have to do two up.
Yeah.
So, okay, that works.
You can do two because there's a team missing.
Yeah, because you've got a team is out. So, okay, cool. And then he says to bring the EFL back to 72 teams, 3 up, 3 down, established and in place for next season. That seems fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can work with that.
We've heard about Barrow and what they would be missing out on if there is no promotion out of the National League.
Barrow has said like £1.5 million if they don't go up, and right now they would go up.
Yeah.
It's insane the amount of money that's worth that promotion. I saw a good article about Wolves women. Now Wolves women had won 14 out of their 15 games. There were 3 games left of the season. They needed a draw to get promoted, and obviously now it's null and void. The entire season is null and void. And so things like that in the women's league, again, there's not as much money on it, but it means so much about they would have been moving into the second tier of women's football. It's insane. And when things are that accurate, it would be like taking away Liverpool's imagine telling Liverpool fans right now that you're not getting the Premier League title. The season.
All right, Nathan Pugh, there it is.
If they went on the BBC website and the league table said 0 wins, 0 losses, 0 draws, 0 points, it just baffles me. I get that they had to end the season, but when things are all but mathematically certain, how can you take that away from someone? You know, and particularly when there's not as much money involved in it, maybe that should make it easier to go ahead and say, you know what, you've earned your spot if it's that guaranteed.
Expand it for the next season and then sort it out with adjusting relegation promotion the next year. But relegating teams right now or not allowing promotion in those cases, do promotion, no relegation. That should be what leagues do right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
all right, what do you have, John? You have some feisty comments, I think.
I have feisty comments from the championship. And
okay, we're moving up the ladder.
Yeah, moving up the ladder. We're skipping League One, heading to the championship. And since you mentioned Stevenage, I'm going to go ahead and mention the team that's at the bottom of the table in the championship, Barnsley.
Okay.
And Barnsley has been pretty hot anyway about the idea of being relegated, especially if the season stops as it is, and then you have teams like Birmingham City who are affected by financial fair play violations. They get points deductions, and then you get more mad. So they're pretty hot about that idea. So, in turn, from our friends at The Guardian, Barnsley have sent a stinging letter to the EFL expressing their concern over the, quote, inability of governance to hold its members accountable in relation to rival championship clubs charged with breaching financial regulations.
I think Reading might get mentioned in this, by the way. We did sell our stadium in a very sneaky way to get through FFP, so we might be guilty of this. I might have to hide the logo for a minute.
Okay, so hide the logo for a minute. You're not mentioned in the article yet. Barnsley are unhappy if the season is not resumed. They stand to be relegated despite clubs such as Derby and Sheffield Wednesday facing independent disciplinary hearings relating to the controversial sale of their stadiums to owners. So you weren't the only one, Jess. Derby and Sheffield Wednesday did the same thing.
It's a clever idea.
The club sells the stadium to the owner as an individual, right?
Yeah, and then that's why you've made that money from the sale of the stadium. And we also sold, I believe, like the parking lot and something else for development. And I think our stadium's been sold like 3 times in the last. It's bad. Like we might be in a little bit of trouble in the future, but loopholes were made to be, exploited. At the end of the day, they're going to have to rewrite the rules otherwise, because it's a smart way of getting around things.
Right now it is. The letter, which made its way to EFL Chair Rick Perry and other championship clubs, states Barnsley's wish to complete the season and that they would firmly oppose relegation if the season was not restarted. The club, who are at the bottom of the championship, 7 points from safety with 9 games to go, are minded to consider legal action.
Of course. I mean, we're going to see a lot of that. And hey, the money is kind of a big deal here. So you have to protect your investment in some form or fashion. And if the league is going to try to take it away from you, you're going to try to take it back. And you're going to use the barristers to do that. You're going to do what you got to do.
But you're spending a lot of money in the long run. Aren't the lawyers going
potentially
to make more money too?
Yeah, the lawyers might make the most money in all of this. That's the scary element of all of it. What's going on with your Reading squad? So where are they? How are they feeling about? They had the first day of training today?
Yeah, first day of training was today. From what I read from one of our reporters, it was split into 6 sessions. So 6 groups, social distance. All you can really do then is cardio, passing,
all the individual stuff, right?
Individual drills. So basically everything you could have been doing at home, but alongside your coaches, I suppose. And Jason, we were texting about how this impacts goalkeepers too, because a lot of goalkeeping practice and a lot of goalkeeping sessions usually involve close contact, because any goalkeeper at that level is fine with shot stopping. It's contested shots they want to deal with. It's crosses into the box with players, barrowing down on them. It's one-on-ones. And when you watch the games that are played right now, you have to look at the goalkeepers and think they look a little step off. They look a little bit hesitant. And can you blame them? If you haven't dove at someone's feet for very often, it starts to get a little bit in the back of your mind. Are you going to make this? Are you going to get this cross? And I've seen a lot of flapping that maybe goalkeepers would usually be catching lately because you can't train accurately.
It's tough. I mean, we saw one of the highlight clips of training for Atlanta United, Brad Kazan going through some of the footwork drills, because what else can you do right now at this stage when you're just in this individual stage? I guess you could have long-range shots, but you're not going to be able to deal with crosses or anything like that yet.
And it gives Brad some time to work on his distribution. I saw some very nice crossbar challenges. I was very impressed with his distribution. So
you two are going to have a conversation about this at some point.
He'll be impressing me when we come back. He'll be hitting everyone on the sidelines perfectly.
That's something that's come up a couple times from different players during this, because you're able to put a little more focus on the technical side right now, because it's really all you can do. So, whether you're working on your weak foot or, in Brad's case, you're working on footwork in general, something you're probably not doing on a regular basis during a season. I don't know. Maybe you learn a few new tricks.
Yeah, we might see some cool little skill moves, some one-on-one, moves to get past the defender. And you've got to put a positive spin on it. These players, yes, they haven't been able to play contact soccer, but they've probably had a good opportunity to work on their physical fitness. They've probably done pretty well with their conditioning. I mean, you can go for a run, you can have a treadmill. Most of these players have cardio equipment in their house, I'm pretty sure, with their paychecks. So it does allow you to look at parts of your game that you may be weak on. Potentially these players have been watching video. You know, they've been watching more things about themselves, analyzing the weak points of the game. And I think it will separate, and from what I've read, it kind of has separated the two types of players there are. There are those that are so motivated on self-improvement and taking their game to the next level that have used this quarantine to better themselves. And there's probably a few of them that maybe had one or two cream pies too many and gained a couple pounds during the off season.
Yeah, there's probably a little bit of that, and they're going to have to work back quickly because all of these leagues, you know, Germany's already back on the field. Spain is looking at June 11th right now for Sevilla and Betis as their first match coming back. Looks like England, I have seen the Premier League potentially the 26th of June.
I think, 26th, the weekend of that one I've seen, but also a lot of coaches saying they want at least 5 weeks of contact training before they start. Beggars must be choosers, right?
Germany had like a week and a half.
And it showed. It did
a little bit. A little bit.
There were some rusty touches.
At first it was. This week wasn't as bad, though. I think it's come back kind of quick. And I think the other element that, you know, we talk about contact training and what this looks like and protocols. You know, we've got to be clear in a couple things. In Germany, you've had 2 weeks of play now. You've had all the testing before it started. You've had the testing in between games. And you haven't had another outbreak. I don't think you've had another positive test since the second round. Premier League, you had 6 in the first round. You had 2 in the second. Yeah. So you've had 8 total, which is about the same number that the Bundesliga had over their 2 divisions. Spain had, I think, 6, maybe 8. You know, it's been low and it hasn't gone up. That's a good sign. You know, that's a good sign for these leagues coming back. And I think the more data like that comes through, the more it's going to help an NWSL and MLS in coming back and knowing that, hey, these protocols work.
Yeah, Germany took a bit of a risk. You know, they were the first ones out. They were almost the test dummies, and they've done a fantastic job. And you've seen them adding little improvements, changing things a little bit. The crowd noise on Fox Sports was an improvement.
What did you
think about that?
Look, I thought I would hate it. I
did too.
I would absolutely hate it. I'm not a fan of like canned laughter on comedy shows, anything like that seems fake. But to me, it was less eerie. I did enjoy week 1 being able to hear the players even more clearly, the communication. I think it'd be a great learning curve for like young kids to watch the game and be able to hear the communication between players and see how important vocalizing is. Obviously, there's a couple of choice words that are used that you might have to cover your kids' ears for. It was an incredible thing to be able to hear and get that insight, and I found it interesting the first couple, but then it started to get weird. The echo was a bit too much. It was a little bit eerie, and honestly, the commentator's voice, you didn't get the same experience from the commentary. I think it almost took away from the commentator because it was their voice, the echo. So I liked it, and I didn't want to like it. I didn't want to like the fact that
right
I
there
was
with you.
cheering after goals. I didn't want to like the fact, but they did really well matching the moments correctly. And whoever was in charge of that should take a bow, because to convince me that canned noise and like fake atmosphere would be a good thing, I mean, it worked. You don't want it all the time, like, you know, but I think it was a very successful choice, and it made it more, it felt more real watching it, which is ironic because it's not real.
Okay, yeah, that was my fear, was that it would come off like ill-timed and fake, and it didn't. It felt legit. Go ahead, John.
Now, according to Alexi Lawless, the crowd noise in Mainz and Leipzig was referred to as the enhanced audio broadcast, which means it was manufactured crowd noise that can be heard throughout. So, I mean, for me, I thought that Mainz, despite how they were on the field,
that was bad.
They did a great job of putting the signboards in that extra level and that extra layer in that first row and those first sections of seats, so you're not looking at empty seats, even though you had a very tight crowd shot the entire time, a very tight action shot the entire time. I thought that the production was really well done, and Mainz was knowledgeable of sight lines for the TV viewer. So they tried to make sure that there was stuff there that would fill the space. So I give them a lot of credit for that. Also, I didn't know what I was going to think about it, but Jason, you've mentioned the point about the idea that you've got to have that really good DJ who's right there on the pulse of everything and knows the right time to sit there.
You've got to have that mentality, yeah.
It has to be someone that knows the game, that knows what people react to stuff. And so you can't just put, and I hate to say it, in MLS maybe it wouldn't work. You'd have to have a sound guy that knew soccer. You couldn't have the football sound guy doing it because it just wouldn't work in the same way. It's very soccer specific, and potentially that's why they were able to do such a good job, because most people working in German sports probably are pretty versed in soccer.
They nailed it. And I think what I'd read, I want to say Ian Joy posted this, in Canada they did not have that feed. So I don't know why Fox, if they were just able to opt for it, if they went for it because of people asking for it. But the world feed we had week 1 didn't have it. Right. Week 2, they chose it. I don't think they chose it for the first game on Saturday morning, if I remember right. I think it was the second game that had it. Or maybe I'm mixing up my days. I don't remember. But it was different. I did like it a lot more than I thought I would. But I think a lot of that is down to the execution. And if the execution isn't good, I don't know if it works.
No. If it's like hitting a button that is just like cheer whenever something happens, then you've got an issue. I think it has to be done perfectly to be done well. So top job to them.
Yeah, no, they nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. What do you got there, John?
Just it says the word cheer.
The word cheer.
You're like flashing an applause light, basically?
Yeah, basically it's what you're doing. It's an applause light.
Good times. It's probably not going to work very well if we go down that road, but, hey, it is what it is. So championship clubs were allowed to return to training today. That was the first step for them. The numbers we have out of the championship, 1,014 players and staff were tested at the end of last week, 2 positive cases, and both from Hull City. Now,
Hull. What are they doing up in Hull?
It's a good question.
That's a question for you, Jess. You know the geography better than we do.
It's the north. The north, The south,
they get out of hand.
Take care of themselves.
But hey, this is the thing. In that NWSL article at The Athletic, they had results from a survey. I think it was an anonymous survey of NWSL players about how many people have you been around during, the lockdown, shutdown, whatever. Mm-hmm. And over half of them said they had been around 5 people or more.
Oh.
And that's one of the things that Germany's talked about from day one is there's a huge responsibility, not just on the clubs, not just on the league, but on the players to do the things they're being asked to do, or none of this works.
No, if the players are lying and they're going off to meet their friends, or they're seeing their girlfriend who's also seeing
Walker.
their parents, it's bad though, and it's detrimental to the entire league. And that's what's concerning potentially in the US. Lockdown hasn't been nearly as strict. I know Felipe wrote a great article talking with the Atlanta United players about how the difference in lockdown here, it was almost a choice, and in South America, in Europe, it was pretty much mandated. Yeah. So maybe in MLS, maybe in NWSL, you have more difficulty because if the players have been, following the more liberal version of lockdown and going out for runs along the belt line and, meeting up with their friends and staying 6 feet apart.
Jumping into a pickup game like Jordi Reyna,
Yeah, you're going to see the numbers being far higher here, and that's where it doesn't work. So the players, if they want to keep playing, need to kind of take a better stance on it, because otherwise MLS are going to be looking around wondering why they've tested 1,300 people and 50 have come back positive. And it's because the lockdown here, again, was a bit more optional, potentially, you could call it.
I'm really curious to hear the numbers in that first round of MLS testing. And they have not... I think teams are doing testing on their own right now. I don't think there's any kind of league-wide mandate for it yet. I don't think the league will report things until later on. that's probably going to help the numbers a little bit because teams will all come back into individual training. If somebody tests positive right now, they don't have to release it. That player just won't be at an individual training session that there's no media at. So nobody's going to know that that player tested positive and that they are recovering in isolation. And that's the other thing we've seen from this so far is everybody who has had a positive test in any of the leagues that have been doing this so far have been asymptomatic, which I think it shows you why you need to test. But also, they haven't had any bad symptoms, and they've recovered fairly quickly, and they've been back on the field. I think most leagues are going with the two negative tests, then you're clear and you can come back. Once you have 2 tests in a row negative, they're getting away from this idea of a mandatory 14-day lockdown. Yeah. But what surprised me in The Guardian, in Paul McInnes's piece that dropped today, is that right now, that's included in the Premier League in their rules of competition, their rules of coming back to training. This is a segment from McInnes's article. One area of uncertainty that remains over the protocols is the rules on quarantine, specifically regarding players who have not failed a test but have come into contact while training with someone who has. The advice of Public Health England, which the Premier League says it is following, would require the player to isolate for 14 days. With training groups to consist of upwards of 6 players, one positive test could have substantial knock-on effects. Yeah. That doesn't seem realistic.
No, but you can understand why they have to do it unless they're testing them.
That's
they
the
just
key.
Test everyone, and the test. I don't know enough about it, and I should probably do more research. But what are the chances of false positives, false negatives? Are they pretty
Depends
high?
on the test.
They do exist.
Yeah, it depends on the test.
But then you say if you have 2, they have to get 2 negatives before they're allowed to come back. Even if they haven't tested positive. You know what I mean? You have to test them twice for the next. The
system that's doing it for the Premier League, they've actually been pretty vocal in their whole planning and all of it. And they said that their test, I think it's 98.8 or 99.2% accurate, which is really high. But they say that
testing 1,200 people, you still got several that will be wrong.
Right. But the odds of having 2 wrong tests in a week are like 7,000 to 1. Okay. So that's why the multiple tests are key here. You know, if you have a positive, okay, you're out over here, you're in isolation, we'll treat symptoms if they are there. If you have 2 negatives, you can come back. And if you continually test negative, you're good.
You're good. God, they got to get used to that stick up their nose. I've seen some videos. It's not very pleasant.
No, it's not.
But the thing is, you know, all these tests, money, dinero. You're talking.
Oh, it's expensive.
It sounds like anywhere between $60 to $100 a pop. Adds up.
So it's adding up, and the more you need, the more players that test positive, the more you're going to need because you got to keep testing them. So you can see, again, we flip back and recycle all the way back to the women's game, why potentially it makes it that much difficult to restart because of how much money it's going to cost to restart safely. And you've got to do it safely. The safety at the end of the day is the most important thing in restarting the leagues.
Yeah, in the Premier League, the idea was that they would do 100 tests a week, which would be your squad and probably the technical staff twice a week. That's going to run, I think about, when I did the math, about $6,000 US a week. And that's one team, 1 week. You start to figure out how many weeks you have to go to finish a season out, and if you have to increase testing because you've had a positive, and it's brutal. And that's not even getting into, you know, extra cleaning staff, all the different things you have to do from a protocol perspective that are going to be more money. It's going to be very expensive for these games to happen. The Bundesliga has a lot of TV money on the line. England, the Premier League, lots of TV money on the line. Right now, they're already talking about, because of the way the season's gone, they might have to give back £350 million across the Premier League on rebates.
Just a little bit.
And that's if they finish. That's if they actually still finish. If they don't finish, I think it's at least twice that.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine Bournemouth?
No. Money talks. And that's what, it's a scary time for the league. And this is why sometimes decisions are made hastily. And that's the one thing I hope that no league chooses to rush back and does it incorrectly, because that's when it becomes catastrophic. If something goes wrong, if a team has a huge outbreak, or, a player gets sick, has a very bad reaction, that's when things start to really, you hope that never happens. But that's why it can't be rushed. This has to be taken seriously. And like we say, MLS has it good right now because they have enough leagues that are kind of pathing the way for them, so they'll be in a good position when they do make that decision.
So then let me ask you guys this. Yep. Did you see the quotes from Nigel Pearson?
I did not.
No. Okay. Enlightened.
Daily Mail, Amatai Winehouse.
Don't trust that.
Which is worse, Jess, the Daily Mail or the Sun?
The Sun, probably.
Okay, that's what I thought.
They're both as bad as each other. But
I had the Daily Mail just slightly higher up on the credibility.
Yeah, the Sun. Ask Liverpool about the Sun, and that's why they're all the way down here. All right, so the Sports Mail column reports that Nigel Pearson has been vocal in Premier League meetings over his concerns the return of the division could be used as propaganda for the British government. Now, Watford...
Okay.
Now, Watford, we know about the testing of Adrian Mariappa testing positive, two staffers testing positive, Troy Deeney and his concerns. And so now, Nigel Pearson has come out and said, and speaking to TalkSport, so this was an interview that he did on TalkSport.
That's more legit.
There are certain things we have to be patient with, because what I wouldn't want to see, or what I really don't want, is to be pushed into having a timetable where it fits with politicians rather than what's right for the sport. That's where I am. I've said what I think over the last week or so, and I certainly stand by that now, having heard the government talking about it again this week. It's very clear that we are very much on the agenda to ease the pressure on them somewhat.
I can see it.
I get it. Yeah.
The power of football in England is huge. The distraction that it might be. I'm sure you've seen the news and how much crazy stuff's going on in England with people not following the lockdown in power.
Multiple times.
It's
250 kilometers away or something.
250 miles with a kid.
Yeah.
I believe it was.
Yeah,
it's madness.
Multiple times. It's all good.
Callum Hudson-Odoi.
Then
I think
that
they're
guy.
looking at taking pressure off, and I can see it as a distraction. It's like college football here. When people found out that there was a chance of college football, that was like the
Glad you mentioned that one, because I'm going to go off.
Yeah.
It meant a lot for morale. It's crazy. It's like when you go to a war and you get better rations. Like, that's what it's almost like in England. Finding out that football's coming back is huge for a lot of people, particularly in the working class communities where football is more than a sport. And I think to those people, potentially there is a slight political agenda, and it is a distraction from the dissent and the anger at politicians right now. And it is a big relief for those people who are dealing with unemployment, that are dealing with all of it. That's kind of their release. So I can see it being used as a weapon almost against the people, as a distraction from political mishaps.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and I'm not arguing it. I don't know if because some people might use it in that way that you shouldn't do it if you're doing it safely and all the other things, because we've talked about the financial implications too.
And with Watford, you have to wonder again what the agenda is.
Yeah, where are they in the table?
I think there might be a little bit of hypocrisy going on there about an alternative agenda. Just maybe.
Christian Seifert, the CEO of the Bundesliga, nailed it. And he talked about this with, I think in the third division in Germany, you're having some issues with the same thing, like teams in certain parts of the table are arguing certain ways. And he's like, depending on where you are in the table, it depends on your morality. It's like, if you're in a certain spot, then you're against it no matter what. If you're in another spot, you're for everything no matter what. No questions asked. It's ridiculous. I think the good thing so far in the soccer world, the Bundesliga has had success. You got 2 weeks. You got a huge match tomorrow with Dortmund and Bayern Munich. That should be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
Things are good. They've shown the way. They have, I think, represented their league and their country really, really well. I think Spain is next, and they're following an agenda that's really similar to the Bundesliga. If Serie A is able to come back and get it done, it'd be an amazing thing for Italy with everything that they've suffered. Yeah. England, I mean, so far, most of the protocols and things make sense. I think they're not going to deviate too far away from what the Bundesliga has shown. Now, you mentioned college football, and my head nearly exploded last week because the SEC has announced that they're going to come back and be able to start practices on June 8th. All right, their entry into campus makes sense. They have to do the antibody test before they go back. They have to pass 2 COVID-19 tests to show that they don't have it within a 72-hour period before they go back. Cool. All that's great. That's really strong. There is no testing procedure after that.
And you expect students, like young, popular boys that are football players, to not go mingle?
Mm-hmm.
Have they attended college before?
No.
Not in this century.
No. And then they're also saying the only time they would have tests would be when players show symptoms, which, as we've kind of heard.
The dumbest thing we've learned over this. It's like Kemp, didn't he not realize people could be asymptomatic all over again?
What,
3 weeks
asymptomatic?
after it was announced that could be the case, yes.
Yeah, multiple times during all of this. So they're talking about going back and doing this. And look, basketball, soccer, contact sports. I think baseball's even in a different conversation because there's some contact, but you're not standing next to somebody for long periods of time in a baseball game.
Sneezing on them.
Offensive linemen, defensive linemen. That's what they do.
It's a collision sport. It's not a contact sport.
And you hold on to them for a long period of time.
Yes.
That's a lot of contact.
Like, that's going to be more contact and more, being in the same space as somebody else than any other sport we've talked about.
No, it's very intimate, you could describe it. It's like rugby.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect rugby players to not need to test after all their...
The National Rugby League in Australia, they've got protocols, and they're coming back, and they're doing all the testing you have to do. Now, cost, when we start talking about a college football team and 100 players and testing, and to do it right, you're talking 2 to 3 times a week, and all the staff.
You just got to cut all your second string players, all the players that are just like there for decoration. Just get rid of them to start with.
We're hearing about that with some championship clubs. I wish I could find which article I read this in earlier today. A player who was kind of on the fringe of the squad, who's out of contract, supposed to be on June 30th, was like, I wasn't called in for testing, so I'm not going to be playing.
Imagine finding that out like that.
You're going to have to make decisions like that. Like, I can't test everybody in the squad. They're out of contract, so they're going to be done. I mean, that's how crazy this is going to get in some sports. Is they're going to have to make these decisions. Like basketball, 15-man roster, pretty easy.
You only need 5 on the.
Yeah,
on the
I mean, if you want to get down to really cut costs, if you're one of these teams that's not going to make the playoffs and you're just playing out the string, you can go with 10. You can roll with 10 players. You can roll with like 3 coaches, a couple trainers. You're good. You can keep costs down. Football, 100 people. 100 freaking people. And now we're not going to test. Nah.
See, Jess, there was another article that Jason and I were going back and forth about, and it was where Huddersfield, if I could get my upper plate to work, Huddersfield chair Phil Hodgkinson thinks that 60 teams could go bust in the English pyramid, and he says that the sport has only itself to blame.
I mean, it's terrifying. We talked about this when Barry and all the things that happen with administration and the fact that in the English league, money talks and relegation matters, and with the cost of players, with how much it costs to run a football team. You've got staff, you've got the canteen, you've got all these different things that take place within a football team, that if you take out the gate costs and the season ticket fees and those smaller teams that don't have the TV money to back them, it's awful. And it's scary how easily teams go into administration. I mean, how many teams have we seen enter administration over the last few years? Like, just because they didn't go completely bust and they managed to find a way out of it, and they managed to have some rich person that works in oil buy them out. There's not a savior for every club out there, and the small teams that aren't very glamorous aren't going to find a savior as easily. There isn't a rich Thai man or whatever's coming to save them. I mean, Reading has had several different owners in the last few years, and you have to wonder when a team doesn't become desirable anymore. And it's scary, the role that fans are what keeps a football club alive a lot of the time, particularly in the smaller leagues. It's them buying the shirt, it's them buying their season ticket, it's them buying spare tickets for their neighbors. And in a league where foreseeably for a fair near time there's going to be no fans, and they're having to have these additional costs on testing, it doesn't balance it out. So I can seriously see a lot of teams really struggling where gate money is pivotal. And you're right, it's football that has the inherent flaw, and it's the flaw that money has become such a important and pivotal standpoint in it.
It almost feels like Premier League, you've got the TV money to back it up. Championship, borderline, but I think you might be able to make the numbers work. League One, League Two, how do you play without fans?
No, because ESPN Plus just about shows. I'd like to see the viewing figures on a League Two game on ESPN Plus. And I mean, ESPN Plus has its own problems right now with people unsubscribing and will they go back and buy their subscriptions, that kind of thing. I hate to say it, but for a lot of people, unless you're a diehard, those games aren't appealing to the majority. Right. So they don't have that TV revenue, and it takes for them promotion. It takes for them a playoff run, a cup run, and if these things aren't happening, then you're doomed.
Spitballing this real quick, but tell me if this makes sense. If you finish the Premier League and Championship seasons by the end of August, you come back and start the next season probably with a month off because you're going to have a lot of transfer stuff to sort out one way or another. So maybe you start the next season October 1st. You're going to have to compress it a little bit. I think the Cup probably needs to take a year off because it just doesn't make sense to work in next year. League One and League Two should not come back until fans can be in the stands. Even if that means they have to play a shorter season and you have to figure out what that means for promotion relegation, they shouldn't rush them back because the other leagues come back because they have TV money to back it up.
You have to treat every situation differently. And like you say, the Championship in the Premier League has that revenue. The smaller leagues don't. Potentially, you have the little cup competition they have, what used to be the Johnston's Paint Shield. What's it called now? That one?
The Gummy Bear?
No, the for smaller clubs, it was like the Johnson's Paint Trophy or something.
That's the one I know it as. Yeah.
Okay.
It's basically for low Championship and Premier League aren't included. I think it still exists.
Yeah, I think so.
Anton Walkes won it, right?
The Johnstone Paint Trophy.
Yeah.
It's still called that? Wow.
No, they lost it. Johnstone walked away. It's just the EFL trophy.
Okay, that's it. So maybe you have an EFL trophy so that the players and fans have something to enjoy even without closed doors, but it's a smaller thing. But you can't have them playing 60 games with no fans. The cost of the travel,
$6,000 a week for testing.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. But maybe you keep a tournament or some sort of cup competition to keep players active to an extent, but on a lesser level. It's a shorter term thing.
It sounds a lot like the NWSL right now, huh?
Yeah, maybe they had a good point apart from the turf. It was a pretty good idea apart from the turf.
Yeah.
So, I think you're right. The most important thing is you don't judge everything with a blanket set of rules. It's so important not to, particularly when in a system like England where there's so many leagues, there's such disparity between all of them. They're completely different kettles of fish, and you have to treat them like that.
The other thing I wanted to get your take on before we wrap up is there's been a talk about it, and if you go back in history, it was actually reality after World War II, where your lower divisions were regionalized. And there's been some talk to have League Two combine with the National League and do a North and South and regionalize it. Make sense?
I mean, if you're trying to limit travel and trying to limit the capacity of spread and mixing and save money because you're not having to go on a long bus journey, because that's another thing. If you're trying to social distance, how do you bring all these players on a 8-hour coach journey from Southend all the way up to Sunderland. You know, it doesn't work. So,
that testing better be good.
and I tell you, when you get to a final between like the Northern League and the Southern League, that'll create some real cool derby games. So it could be interesting. And I think you're right; it does knock out some different issues that have arisen, but still doesn't solve the issue of the money and the costing of, you know, the long-term costing of having to test people. And we have to wonder how long this is all going to go on for. It's the foreseeable future. So
the talk in Germany is that they're not expecting to have fans in the stands for the rest of 2020.
Mm-hmm. That's what I've heard with a lot of things too, that the year is pretty much wrapped up when it comes to big sporting events and fans. So again, Germany can survive. They've got potentially the money and the backing, at least the big clubs. The Premier League will be okay for that period of time, but smaller teams, you got to think that's a whole year, and then your season ticket money, you're not even giving them a full season ticket potentially if things do return as normal. So,
well, here's the big difference too with Germany is the first two divisions are structured together. They are one company, so that helps with TV money, and also they've been really out in front on solidarity payments and having the big leagues support the lower leagues. Like I think first month, they committed money to the third division and to the women's teams in the first division that weren't Bundesliga clubs. So they've been kind of in that all-together idea. Mm-hmm. England has been the opposite.
It's you're on your own. And that's the thing, and we have to learn. Bundesliga and Germany is doing things right now. Those teams that need the help are getting the help from the team that have more than they potentially need right now. They have an excess, and they're seeing for the greater good of the game. Because guess what? Think about how many players develop in those lower leagues. They see, and we talked about it earlier, when John was talking about investing in the women's game right now, they see the benefit in the long term. And if those small teams fold that actually are finding the grassroots players that are nurturing people up the smaller leagues, if they fold, then you lose a whole generation of players that you recruit from. So England, you've got to think about how many players are found from League 2, League 1. How many Premier League teams go recruiting in there? How many do they utilize these teams for putting their players out on loan? You know, they use these small clubs when they want them. They use them when they want to give their 19-year-old future star some game time. It would be nice to see that they were giving in their time of need as well.
We need more Gareth Bale sponsorship. Not Gareth Bale, sorry.
Harry Kane.
Harry Kane sponsorship ideas.
Oh, that reminds me. I got to see.
Gareth Bale's got the money to do it. He could do it.
Yeah,
come on,
really?
Gareth.
Be a golf team hit sponsor.
Well, yeah, that's also true. Probably. More than likely. John, any other stories we did not hit that are vital for this evening?
Neutral venues, home and away, they might be back on the table in the Premier League.
Can they just make up their mind? Like
Apparently
it was,
not.
Yes, neutral. No neutral. That's very bad. Now it's
it was
neutral again.
No neutral. I thought they all voted, like
that's what I thought.
Teams voted. Hey-ho.
Once again, quoting our friends from the Daily Mail, a proposal to use home and away and or neutral venues is on the agenda for the meeting on Thursday, where they are going to be asked to provide approval in principle for the Premier League's preferred resumption date, fixture list, and plans for allocating league position in the event of curtailment. Also, a formal vote on a proposed financial settlement with the broadcasters.
Yeah, so let's run through that timeline really quick because I think it's going to overlap with tomorrow morning's show. So Sunday night, the government gave advice to allow elite sports to move to stage 2 to return to play. Really broad. The leagues and sports can kind of determine things within that. The Premier League has, and they gave the rules for the return to contact training, I guess today at some point, 24 hours before they're put to a vote tomorrow. So that's probably going to happen in the morning while we're doing the show. Then you have all of the things like that quarantine issue that we talked about. And then you have a meeting on Wednesday, a shareholders meeting, to finalize that kind of side, the schedule, the competition rules, all that stuff. Then Thursday, you're having another shareholders meeting. That's where the issue of curtailing the season, if you can't finish it, and what that would look like, and maybe not having relegation. That's supposed to be on the table on Thursday. and the idea about the TV side and rebates. Sky and BT have asked the league to give them some money back because of the disruption to the season, and Sky and BT have lost subscribers, and they say because of that. So that's a lot of stuff to sort out in a few days.
It's a big conversation to be had, and hopefully there'll be more solutions than there are just naysayers.
Yeah, my expectation is over the next few mornings we will get announcements, we will get anonymous quotes of, well, this is really great or this is really awful, and then you'll get quotes of people saying we're going to the courts. So it's going to get ugly. I just don't see how it doesn't. And that's just the Premier League. That's not even getting into the championship side of it.
But at least we have Bundesliga right now, guys. At least we have some.
It's amazing what happens when you're in lockstep with the government and you're in concert with what they want to do from the absolute beginning.
Follow the rules, and we will get it back.
Yeah, have conversations with the government. Hey, what would you like to do? Well, we're thinking about this. Okay, well, we'll kind of talk to you about it, and we'll do this
Except for Dresden, where they said, no, you got to all go into quarantine because somebody tested positive. Dresden was a little harsh, but outside of that, they were okay. It all worked pretty well.
And then we have, as Nick calls it, England.
Well, we had Scotland first, and England is just following through on the Scottish madness.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that was the only other big thing that I had. You had 5,000 people showing up for the Cup final in Belarus in a stadium of 22,000, ignoring social distancing.
Well, they've been doing that for months now.
Was that the illegal game? Did you see was that the illegal game that took place?
An illegal game?
There was a game that broke lockdown rules and a bunch of people stormed the pitch.
I haven't seen this.
I'll have to find it. I'll find it and send it to you guys. There was a pickup game that turned into like 1,000 people storming a pitch.
Oh, no. Craziness. But, the only thing I've seen like that is I think it was Flamengo in Brazil was like, no, we're not training. We're just having injured players come in. And then they sent like a drone over the walls, and they had 2 fields of full training going on. So,
yeah, and apparently 6 championship clubs had already started training in the Skybet Championship. 6 clubs already had violated the idea that you weren't supposed to be training yet, and there was word that half a dozen clubs already were training.
Yeah, what do you want to bet that in college football we get tons of that?
Oh yeah. That too. Let's see. I think I'm caught up on the day for England and Europe on all of my notes.
All right. Well, we will be doing these Monday evening check-in shows going forward since we can't do soccer over there from the Brewhouse. And what we're hearing is the Brewhouse June 1st could be edging back to a small opening, which is good to hear. So we'll keep you posted on that. And when we're able to hang out at the Brewhouse, we'll make it all work. Tries to break my computer. I blame the Daily Mail. Badgermon, thank you for sending that over. I'll open it when the show is over because I just turned into a robot. All right. And that was the article. It was in France, Jess. That was the one you were talking about. 400 fans.
That's what I was talking about.
Yes.
Thank gosh.
We will have it.
I thought it was Corona brain.
we will have it for tomorrow's show for sure. But tomorrow, 9 a.m., rest of the week, 9 a.m., Mondays, 7 o'clock, will be our evening shows with Jess going forward. Jess, thanks. Good to see you.
Thank you, guys. Good to be back talking footy.
Hopefully we'll have some other games to talk about. Huge one tomorrow, Dortmund and Bayern. No Thiago for Bayern. He is out with an injury.
Big deal there.
That's a big loss.
That's pretty much deciding times now.
Dortmund's got to win. Must win for Dortmund. That should be a fun match. Should be a really fun match. We'll get you set for it in the morning. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, y'all. Mucha plata, y'all.
Mucha plata.
All right.